was gain an appreciation for who each other is and where we have come from, all right? And so, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll go first, let me know what kind of a church you grew up in or you spent your time in so we can kind of have that background. I grew up in the Church of Christ. My mom and dad did not. My dad was straight Norwegian and my mom straight Virginia hillbilly. And he was in the service and they met on a blind date. And so I'm a Norwegian hillbilly. That's what I am. But my dad was a Friends background, and that comes from the Quakers. And my mom was a Methodist background in Virginia. And when we were growing up, they began to attend the Church of Christ, and that's what I grew up in. When we entered into the ministry, I got married 2 years after, then Corinne and I were at that same church. But then I left the ministry for 3 years. Needed to do some searching on some issues, some doctrinal issues, and was working on a master's degree. And so I worked in a grocery warehouse Teamsters union for 3 years. While I did that, I got to visit a whole bunch of different churches. And for me, I wanted to make sure what the Lord was doing in the area of spiritual gifts, charismatic gifts, Pentecostal, and for 1.5 years, that's what I did. I visited these kinds of churches and opened the Bible with their preachers, and I got a real understanding of where this is, okay? So did that, then I came back to the Christian church, felt like that was probably as close to the Bible as anything I found out there, and then I became a deacon within the church, and then I went back into the ministry. So just wanted you guys to know that, just so you know that I've had some experiences outside our church as well, okay? Jerry, how about your?
Grew up in this church.
Okay.
Down in the old building, started out down there.
Okay.
Went through the whole, it was interesting that one of the memories I have of that down there was the building project, that to raise the money to build this building.
Okay. Okay.
Big.
Yeah.
And we talked earlier here, back in those days, Church of Christ, it was, I don't know that it was ever specifically said, but the idea was there that if you didn't go to Church of Christ, you weren't going to heaven.
That's right.
That was pretty much a closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first began preaching, it was in St. Mary's, Ohio. Most of you would know where that is. It was the St. Mary's Church of Christ. And when I went to Atlanta, Georgia, I'll never forget, I went to a conference down there. It was not at one of our churches. It was a different church. And I went down there as a St. Mary's Church of Christ preacher. What I didn't realize that they were in fear and trembling of my coming to this conference. They were. They thought I would come in and I would disrupt everything because of that attitude that some of our guys had. And that was that if you weren't a part of us, you weren't in. It was that thing. So back in the 70s, it was a very real thing back in the Church of Christ. I got to know a young lady before I got married, okay, got to know a young lady that was in the church, and she said, hey, I want to show you something. This was after day 2 or 3 that I was there. Showed me their membership packet, and on the page as cults, guess who was listed under the cults?
Church of Christ.
Church of Christ. And I thought, my goodness, if that's what some people think about us, then that's not who I am. And so it made me very aware that some of our people had put that impression out there. Rick, what kind of a church did you grow up in?
I grew up in the Church of Christ.
Okay.
Been a part of it my whole life.
Okay.
Went to graduate school at Ashland Seminary.
Okay.
And was exposed to, there's a large variety of backgrounds.
Sure.
That go to school there.
Sure.
And was exposed to a lot of different ideas there.
Right.
Some of which I had to say, whoa. Some of which I thought, wow.
Yeah.
And so it broadened my horizons
Good.
tremendously.
Good.
And,
Okay. That's good. Yeah. Ray, background?
Oh, I grew up almost entirely in the Church of Christ.
Okay.
Again, I've told this group, I think, before. Judy and I met in the 4th grade. When I was in about the 6th or 7th grade, my parents built another house. And it just happened to be at a Church of Christ,
Okay.
where Judy went with her parents to church. So if I wanted to see her, I went to that church. And I could walk to it. It was about from here to the high school, about that
Okay.
distance. My parents did not go to church, but they followed me to that church,
How about that?
which was extremely interesting there. And
That's great.
her dad was a elder.
Okay.
And on November 15th, 1959, I was baptized.
No way. November 15th, 1959.
Yeah,
You were baptized?
yeah.
That's my baptism date.
Is that right?
Yes.
No way.
Yes.
Is that right?
It absolutely is.
my
That's,
goodness.
that's hilarious. That's funny. Okay.
Oh, God.
Jeff?
Church of Christ my whole life. I grew up in the Clarksville Christian Church in Indiana. Was there, moved, but I was telling Ray, at a period in my life when I knew I needed to accept Christ, I didn't. I ran. That's what I always say. Because I wanted to go enjoy my life.
Right.
What I thought was
Right.
my life.
Right.
Joined the Army, was around Protestant, not
Okay.
Christian. When I first went in the Army in 1981, you could not get Christian put on your dog tags. You can now. But it was Protestant. So I got to experience a lot of that side, a little bit of Lutheran. And then a lot of that was overseas. And then when I came back to the States, it was back in, and I always joke with preachers, other than somebody like you, but I've been in so many Christian churches of Christ. And I've been in so many Church of Christ who've legally changed their name
Yes.
to Christian Church
Right.
because of things you talked about.
Right.
In Long Island as well as here in Ohio, they've changed their name to Christian Church. But anyway, it's been Christian Church, Church of Christ in the
Okay.
brotherhood my whole life.
Good. Adam?
Just for video purposes, I'm gonna stand by the door.
Sure, sure.
Because if I turn it, my face will be this big.
Okay, gotcha.
So I grew up in this church, 12 years old, got baptized. I don't know if it was November 15th or not. It wasn't 1959. Jerry can attest to that. Was a youth minister at Linden Church of Christ in Columbus for a year and a half during Bible college. Then came back and helped Ontario Christian Church when they built their building. I ran their soundboard for 2 years, and then back here. So
Okay.
pretty much Church of Christ.
Okay, thank you.
Hurry.
Will?
I grew up in a Brethren in Christ church.
Okay.
And I was telling Ben, the only difference between this church and Brethren in Christ is when you're baptized, you go down 3 times and it's forward
Right.
because he hung on the cross. That's the way they do it. Other than
Okay.
that, it's pretty much the same as this church. Sue grew up. It's interesting. I was chuckling as you were talking about Church of Christ. She grew up in a non-instrumental
Oh, yeah.
Church of Christ, which is amazing because of her. Her brother is a concert pianist, but that's, I think, more than Church of Christ. The non-instrumental get that knock because when her parents would go to Florida, they had a booklet that said where the saints meet.
Yes.
And it was where every non-instrumental church was from here to Florida.
Yeah.
And that was their philosophy, that you aren't Christian unless you go to a non-instrumental Church
Right.
of Christ.
Right.
Since he mentioned that, if I could, Dave, my brother, grew up here,
Okay.
got married. His wife went to a non-instrumental church in Columbus. They said he could not be saved if he wasn't rebaptized in their non-instrumental Church of Christ and let go of this.
Right.
Well, he has since divorced her and he's now back here.
Okay.
But not necessarily for that reason, but that was just in my mind. It was crazy that he said, I cannot be saved, or remember, that's what the church is telling me. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's bad.
And for me, I was in a camp quartet that all summer long, that's what we did. We traveled to different camps, and Round Lake was one of them back in the 70s that I got to visit with our quartet. I ended up being a youth minister to begin with. The other guy that sang tenor ended up being the music director in a non-instrumental Church of Christ. So, and they were okay with, because for them it was a preference. Other churches of Christ a cappella, it's a matter of salvation. So there is a difference, it's out there. Yeah, Ben?
I grew up in the Christian Church, Church of Christ. My dad's a retired Christian Church, Church of Christ minister.
Okay. Yeah, you're stuck with it.
So when I went to college, the college I went to, First Christian Church of Canton was,
Yeah.
right beside it. So,
Okay.
and my dad had gone up to a lot of ministers' conferences at First Christian Church. So he took me over and introduced me to all of the ministers. Now I kind of think it was so I know that you're going to church on Sunday and I can check in with you. So, which probably wasn't a bad thing, but I didn't go there all the time just because it was so huge and it, you know, but I was always in church, so I went to all kinds of and, you know, if somebody said, hey, I'm going to church, where you go? I'd go with them. I went to one that they did everything but bring snakes out. That was way out of my comfort zone. And I did learn that when you get invited to churches, you should drive yourself.
Okay, kind of like a blind date.
But yeah, I mean, it was something.
Was David Courts there when you visited? Do you remember? Okay, he was the senior minister of First Christian for a time. I knew David. Okay. Alan?
I was raised basically in Pentecostal church. Church of God of Prophecy was the legal name. They split from the Church of God split to the Elders and Church of God of Prophecy.
Sure.
So I didn't know all that when I went. But so I went there up through about 26 years old, and I fell away from the Lord. Got married to Donna. Some of you know, got married to her, and we took the kids to the Church of the Cross here, where my mother-in-law went for 2 or 3 years, and then we didn't go for another many years until I came here in 2009, based on an invitation from Brian Limey. So,
Okay.
yeah, so I've been here ever since.
All right, good. Thank you, Alan. Don?
Grew up in the Brethren Church,
Okay.
came to Church of Christ in Cincinnati, Clover Neck, it was called back then.
Where was it?
Clover Neck in
Oh, yeah, I
Cincinnati.
know Clover Neck, sure.
For the theological reason that my future wife asked me to go.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Seems to be a common theme.
Well, it's not a bad thing. Jerry asked me where I met my wife, and that was in church camp. I was in the camp quartet, and it was in Pennsylvania where she went to camp. Then when she visited Cincinnati, she was a junior in college, we began to date. So we didn't date for a number of years, but that's where I met her. Not a bad place to meet a future wife. All right? We're okay with that.